3 days of near-continuous combat had transformed the rolling plains of Abbott Colony into a wasteland of smoking craters and twisted metal. Captain Jordan Caldwell crouched behind the remains of a colonial defense turret, his quantum spurs humming at a lower frequency to conserve power. His Magnum heavy repeater clicked empty, the 5th time in as many hours. "Powers," he called over the tactical comm. "Status report." Lieutenant Powers's reply came through thick with static. "Holding the western approach, sir. Thunderbird's down to 18% charge. Harrington's shield generator is the only thing keeping their flanking units from overrunning the medical station." Caldwell nodded grimly, reaching for his last power cell. The Endurance Elect directive had returned with a vengeance, their combat frames reconfigured with new adaptive shielding specifically designed to counter the Knight's quantum disruption techniques. What had begun as a simple delaying action had turned into a desperate last stand. "Wilson, how are we looking on artillery support?" Caldwell asked, slapping the power cell into his repeater. The weapon hummed back to life, though the quantum accelerators pulsed with noticeably less brilliance than before. "Bad news, Cap," came Wilson's drawl, punctuated by the distinctive whine of his Lonstar launcher firing in the distance. "Down to my last 12 charges and the colonial batteries are running on backup power cells. Another hour, tops, before we're throwing rocks." Caldwell allowed himself a moment of grim reflection. His team had performed miracles these past days, holding off waves of increasingly sophisticated machine attackers. The colonial militia had fought with unexpected courage, inspired by the Knight's example. But courage and determination could only compensate for so much against an enemy that never tired, never hesitated, and learned from every engagement. "Hawkins, you still breathing?" Caldwell called to his infiltration specialist. "Barely, sir," came the strained reply. "My stealth system's fried. Took some damage on that last run behind their lines. Got the targeting data you wanted, though. Uploading now." Caldwell's neural interface pinged as Hawkins's reconnaissance data flowed into his tactical display. The picture it painted wasn't pretty. The Endurance Elect had deployed their entire regional force, over 15,000 combat frames, backed by heavy artillery platforms and atmospheric interceptors. Their formations had adapted to the Knight's disruptive tactics, spreading out in quantum-resistant patterns that minimized the effectiveness of the San Jacinto Special and other trademark maneuvers. "Colonial Command, this is Knight Actual," Caldwell transmitted, pulling himself to his feet. "What's the status on those reinforcements?" The reply was immediate, if not encouraging. "Knight Actual, this is Colonel Hayes. No word from Earth Command since yesterday's transmission. Last update estimated Knight reinforcements were still 24 hours out. We're on our own, Captain." Caldwell's quantum spurs flared briefly as he processed this information. 24 hours. They wouldn't last 2 at the current rate of attrition. "Understood, Colonel. We'll make do." He switched to the team channel. "Knights, rally on my position. Time for a strategy session." Within minutes, his battered team had converged on his location. They looked like hell, armor scorched and dented, weapons showing clear signs of overuse, faces streaked with sweat and grime, but their eyes still burned with that unmistakable Texas determination. "I won't sugarcoat it, boys," Caldwell said, his voice steady. "Reinforcements are a day out, and the Endurance Elect are massing for what looks like a final push. Colonial defenses are hanging by a thread. Then we stop holding back," Wilson suggested, his Stampede driver cradled in his arms like a beloved pet. "Full quantum cascade. Might fry our systems, but it'll take a chunk of them with us." Powers shook his head. "Cascade would collapse half the defense grid, too. We'd be sacrificing the colonists we're here to protect." "What about the Continental shield generators?" Harrington asked, his fingers dancing across a tactical display projected from his gauntlet. "If we redirected all remaining power, we might be able to create a temporary dome over the main settlement. Buy time for evac, at least." Caldwell considered this. How long would it hold? "Against their current artillery configuration, maybe 3 hours, Harrington shrugged. 4 if we're lucky. Not enough time to evac the whole colony, Hawkins pointed out. And there's nowhere to evac to anyway. Nearest sister settlement is 5 days by ground transport. A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by the distant rumble of Endurance Elect artillery and the soft hum of their quantum equipment. "Well, I don't know about y'all," Caldwell finally said, adjusting his Stetson, "but I didn't sign up with the Texas Knights to give up when the odds got long." His hand moved to the ceremonial sword at his hip, the plasma-tipped blade still humming with lethal energy despite days of continuous use. "We're going to hold this line, not just for a few more hours, but for as long as it takes, because that's what Knights do." Powers nodded, a tight smile forming. "Damn right, sir. Besides, running ain't very Texan." "Neither is dying unnecessarily," Harrington countered, though there was no real argument in his tone. "But I suppose going out in a blaze of quantum glory has a certain appeal." "That's the spirit," Wilson grinned, checking his Lawn Star launcher's remaining charges. "Let's make sure the Endurance Elect remember this day. Colonial militia reports enemy forces massing on the northern ridge," Hawkins said, his attention on the tactical feed. "Looks like they're about to—" Whatever he was about to say was drowned out by a deafening roar from above. The Knights instinctively looked up, weapons raised, expecting to see Endurance Elect air support making a strafing run. Instead, they saw salvation. The sky above Abbott Colony split apart as dozens, then hundreds of quantum ruptures tore through the upper atmosphere. Through each rupture poured Texas Knights dropships, not the small tactical pods the team had arrived in, but full-sized assault carriers, each bearing the distinctive Lone Star emblem and trailing blue quantum fire. "Would you look at that?" Wilson breathed, his weathered face breaking into an incredulous grin. "The cavalry's here, and they brought the whole damn ranch." Caldwell's comm crackled to life with a transmission on the Knight Priority Channel. "Abbott Colony, this is Marshal Gabriela Santiago of the Texas Knights' First Fleet. Heard y'all were throwing a party and forgot to send us an invitation." "Marshal Santiago," Caldwell replied, unable to keep the relief from his voice. "Your timing is impeccable. We were just about to start the main event." "Well, hold your horses, Captain. We brought a few friends who'd like to join in." As if on cue, the quantum ruptures widened, and what emerged next made even the battle-hardened Caldwell's jaw drop. Massive Knight battlecruisers pushed through the dimensional tears, their hulls emblazoned with names that echoed Texas history. The Alamo, San Jacinto, Goliad's Revenge, the Yellow Rose, and behind them, stretching as far as the eye could see, came the full might of the Texas Knights. Drop pods by the thousands rained down across the battlefield like a meteor shower, each one containing a knight in full battle armor. Assault shuttles disgorged heavy weapons teams and quantum artillery platforms. Specialized units on what appeared to be actual horses, though closer inspection revealed them to be quantum phase mounts that shifted between physical and energy states with each thundering step, galloped directly out of the ruptures and charged toward the Endurance Elect lines. "Mother of mercy," Harrington whispered. That's the entire Knight Corps." "Not the entire Corps," came Marshal Santiago's amused reply over the open channel. "We left a couple dozen back home to mind the ranch." Above the battlefield, the Knights' flagship, the massive battlecruiser Remember Travis, moved into position. Its quantum drives pulsed with blue fire that seemed to bend space itself, creating rippling distortions that confused the Endurance Elect targeting systems. "All Knights, this is Marshal Santiago," boomed a voice across all frequencies. "Our brothers have been holding the line for 3 days against impossible odds. Now we show these machines what happens when you rile up the whole state of Texas." A new transmission cut in, and Caldwell recognized the distinctive drawl of the Knights' Supreme Commander, Marshal John Moondog Blackwell. "Knights of Texas, deploy in standard formation, revival pattern, authorization, remember the Alamo." Those last 3 words sent a visible pulse through every quantum spur on the battlefield. The blue energy trails intensified 100-fold, merging into patterns that made reality itself shudder. Colonial defenders watched in awe as their tactical displays went haywire, unable to process the quantum disruption field being generated. The Knights weren't just arriving, they were making an entrance. "Captain Caldwell," came Marshal Santiago's voice, now on a private channel. "Your team's done the impossible holding this ground. Now it's time for y'all to step back and catch your breath while we handle cleanup." Caldwell watched as the first wave of reinforcements hit the Endurance Elect lines like a tsunami of blue fire and Texas steel. Quantum spurs left reality, distorting trails across the battlefield as thousands of knights moved in coordinated attack patterns that defied conventional tactics. Heavy weapons teams deployed what looked like antique Gatling guns modified with quantum accelerators, filling the air with miniature singularities that tore through the machine's advanced shielding like it was tissue paper. And above it all, the night battlecruisers began a maneuver that Colonel Hayes would later describe in his official report as the most beautiful and terrifying thing I have ever witnessed. They arranged themselves in a perfect five-pointed star formation, their quantum drive synchronizing to create a cascading energy pattern that rippled outward in all directions. "What are they doing?" Powers asked, shielding his eyes against the increasing brightness of the quantum display. Caldwell grinned, recognizing the formation. "That, Lieutenant, is the Lone Star Convergence. Only been successfully executed twice in night history. Takes perfect harmony between ship, crew, and quantum matrices." As if to confirm his words, the 5 battlecruisers' energy output suddenly merged into a single column of blinding blue fire that shot downward directly into the center of the Endurance Elect formation. Where it touched down, reality itself seemed to fold inward, creating a localized quantum singularity that swallowed nearly 1,000 combat frames in an instant. "Holy," Wilson breathed. "They just hit him with a quantum star." The effect on the battlefield was immediate and dramatic. The Endurance Elect combat frames, their swarm intelligence suddenly deprived of a significant portion of their processing nodes, faltered visibly. Their perfect formations wavered, then broke entirely as the Knights pressed their advantage. And press they did. The newly arrived Texas Knights moved with a coordination that bordered on supernatural, their tactics adapting faster than the machines could compute. Quantum cavalry units charged through the enemy lines, their phase-shifting mounts allowing them to materialize directly within the Endurance Elect formations. Heavy weapons teams created overlapping fields of fire that herded the machines into killing zones, where specialized night squads waited with plasma-tipped blades. In the air, night interceptors, modified atmospheric craft that somehow managed to incorporate elements of ancient biplane designs while still conforming to the laws of aerodynamics, engaged the Endurance Elect aerial units. They flew in formations that made no tactical sense, yet proved devastatingly effective, quantum contrails spelling out patterns that disrupted the machine's targeting systems. "Attention all colonial forces," Marshal Santiago's voice rang out across the battlefield. "Fall back to defensive positions and focus on protecting your civilians. The Texas Knights have the field." Colonel Hayes' reply carried a note of stunned disbelief. "Acknowledged, Marshal. But how many of you are there?" The answer came with audible pride. 30,000 Knights, Colonel. The largest deployment since the Battle of Proxima Centauri. When Texas brings the thunder, we don't skimp on the lightning." Caldwell's team watched from their position as the tide of battle shifted dramatically. Where they had been fighting a desperate holding action against overwhelming odds, now the Endurance Elect were the ones being inexorably pushed back, their advanced combat frames falling by the hundreds before the Knights' onslaught. "Kind of makes our efforts these past days seem small, doesn't it?" Hawkins mused, watching as a squad of fresh Knights took down an Endurance Elect heavy unit with synchronized sword strikes. "Not at all," Caldwell replied firmly. "If we hadn't held this ground, there wouldn't be anything left to save. Remember the first rule of the Texas Knights." His team recited it together, a mantra learned during their first days of training. "One night standing is enough to turn the tide." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by the approach of a knight in ornate command armor, quantum spurs leaving particularly bright trails of blue fire with each step. The marshal's insignia gleamed on her chest plate, and despite the full helmet, Caldwell knew exactly who he was facing. "Captain Caldwell," Marshal Santiago greeted, her helmet retracting to reveal a face lined with experience but still bright with the unmistakable fire of Texas determination. "Your reputation doesn't do you justice." Caldwell straightened to attention, his team following suit. "Marshal, we were just doing our duty. 5 nights holding off thousands of Endurance Elect combat frames for 3 days straight." Santiago's eyebrow arched incredulously. "That's not duty, Captain. That's the kind of story that gets told around campfires for generations." She gestured to the battlefield, where the night reinforcements continued to push back the mechanical enemy. "This mop-up operation is impressive, sure, but what your team accomplished? That's legendary." Caldwell's comm pinged with a priority alert, and he checked his neural interface. "Marshal, our sensors are picking up unusual activity at the Endurance Elect command node. Looks like they're concentrating their remaining forces for some kind of last stand." Santiago nodded. "We've noticed. Their tactical algorithms always default to conservation of key assets when defeat becomes inevitable. They'll try to preserve their command intelligence while sacrificing the regular combat frames." "Permission to join the push to their command node, Marshal?" Caldwell requested, his quantum spurs flaring brighter at the prospect. "My team has unfinished business with these particular machines." Santiago studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Wouldn't have it any other way, Captain. In fact," she touched her comm, issuing a series of rapid orders. "I'm assigning you tactical command of Bravo Squadron. Fresh troops, full quantum charge, they could use your experience with these specific Endurance Elect units." Within minutes, Caldwell and his team found themselves at the head of 100 night reinforcements, their armor gleaming in the sun, quantum spurs humming with barely contained energy. The contrast between these fresh troops and Caldwell's battle-worn team was stark, but the respect in the newcomers' eyes was unmistakable. "Bravo Squadron," Caldwell addressed them, his voice carrying that perfect blend of authority and camaraderie that had made him a natural leader. "Today we finish what we started 3 days ago. The Endurance Elect came to Abbott Colony thinking they'd find easy prey. Instead, they found Texas Knights." A cheer went up from the assembled warriors, their quantum spurs flaring in unison. Caldwell continued, drawing his plasma-tipped blade. "We're going to show them exactly what that means. Traditional night attack formation, quantum disruption pattern delta, power levels at maximum. No need to conserve energy this time." As his expanded command moved out toward the Endurance Elect command node, Caldwell couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. His team had held the line against impossible odds, buying time for this moment when the full might of Texas could be brought to bear against those who threatened the innocent. The Endurance Elect had calculated, adapted, and refined their tactics. They'd pushed their advanced technology to its limits, trying to overcome 5 determined knights. Now they faced thousands, each one carrying generations of Texas spirit encoded in their quantum matrices. And as the reinforced knights charged across the battlefield, their quantum spurs leaving trails of blue fire that seemed to set the very air alight, the truth became clear even to the machine intelligence. Some calculations simply couldn't account for Texas determination. Some equations had no solution when Texas spirit was factored in. And when the stars at night aligned just right, big and bright deep in the heart of Texas, well, that was the kind of cosmic math that had been breaking calculators since humanity first reached for the stars. And the Knights were just getting warmed up. The Texan Knights returned to Sci-Fi Vault. Hoorah! The eyes of Texas are upon us all. Be sure to check out the Texan Knights playlist in the bottom left of your screen. We have several more stories dropping this month. Thank you all for subscribing, commenting, sharing, and for liking this video. All of that helps the channel grow, and it helps us get more Texan Knight stories out there.